Hi, good night, everyone. I am Adanna, and with me we have Patrick Anthony, the one and only Monsignor PABA, Father, however you want me to call you tonight. I don't know what title you're using. Good evening, welcome.
Hi. Hi, Adanna. Hi, friends. Wonderful to be here tonight. First, to continue our convo preparation for Countdown Grenada.
Yes.
Bishop Harvey.
Yeah.
Yes. No, it's really wonderful to be here, Adanna. First, to really sort of go back down memory lane in terms of where we've come from and where we're going, as far as the conference is concerned.
Yes. So this is what we kind of will be doing tonight. We're kind of taking that walk down memory lane to just help our viewers kind of get a sense of how this all began, what were some of the ingredients bubbling around in the pot, and how it has kind of evolved over the years. Good memories, that kind of thing. I joined late down the line, so I'll be going through your own memory to see what the conference is all about. The Conference on Theology in the Caribbean today started in 1994. So let's hear how this thing really got going.
Well, it's interesting that now we're having all these conferences on the Black Power Revolution in Trinidad in the 70s, and I think that we cannot think of our conference without that backdrop of what happened in Trinidad when we were students in those days in Trinidad, and the whole kinds of Black consciousness. We think of people like Terry Julian and Earl, who just a number of the call. Hannah, just a call. I have to take this call. Just a second.
We know you're a busy person.
Hello? Sorry.
So as Papa tried to, kind of take this call, I guess I could take the opportunity to say that we are preparing for conference 2023 in Grenada, June the 26th to the 30th. So yes, well, I know you're important, man.
Sorry about that. You're wondering whether I was coming for dinner. I told them no. Yes. So then, as I was saying, the context of the background, of the sort of Black Power revolution and what was happening in Trinidad, and many of us were students in Trinidad at the time, and we had left Trinidad. We had gone back to our respective countries, and we were sort of really conscious of Caribbean identity. It was the time of the CCC, Caribbean Council of Churches, and this sense of Caribbean consciousness, Caribbean oneness and unity, and so, and church is very vibrant church in the Caribbean, indigenous church. So it was within that whole kind of concept of Black awareness, Caribbean awareness, that within the Catholic Church, an attempt was made to develop a kind of American-style Institute of Catechetics to try to adapt to train catechists, but within the Caribbean context. And the attempt was started out by a Jesuit in Jamaica. And when the first conference was held, some of us began to raise issues about, okay, we are talking about catechesis, but how is that relating to our Caribbean situation today, especially what's happening to the Black consciousness and Caribbean awareness and whatnot. And that kind of challenge was really was not well received. I mean, the persons who were running the Catechetics Institute could not deal with it, and so a crisis developed. The crisis developed to the point that, in fact, we had an institute in Barbados in 72, in which there was a big confrontation when we challenged. We said, what is this whole Caribbean Institute about if it's not going to face the realities of the Black Power consciousness, the whole question of Caribbean identity, the work of the CCC, Caribbean Council of Churches?
So who is we? Who was having this?
A number of us involved in that. People like Terry Julian.
Right, yeah.
There were people like Everett Johnson, Everett Johnson was part of that kind of discourse. Henry Charles and so, Joe Harris and so, a number. Michel de Bataille was part of that kind of course and that kind of discussion. In fact, in Barbados, when the thing came to a head, Michel de Bataille was the one who really tried to become a mediator between what we call the Black consciousness and the Caribbean consciousness people and the establishment persons, And
okay. So the radicals versus traditional, right?
Michel made this big confession on behalf of all white people, and so of all white people like that to Black people in the Caribbean. They're very, 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 very touching and moving kind of admittance of racism in the church and so forth. It was a very honest, kind of confrontation. But the end of it was as a result of that confrontation in Barbados. The whole institute was stopped. So that this Caribbean Institute of Catechetics was just stopped. And at the time the people nuncio was one guy called Luis Barbarito, and it is Terry Julian was the one who coined a famous that all the efforts of Caribbean theology came to naught because Barbarito vexed. Because the pressure that the nuncio put on the bishops, at the time, people like Sam Carter and so, to make sure that this whole thing did not continue because of this breed of radicals who are trying to kind of radicalize the church. So with the demise of the Catechetical Institute, what happened was that some efforts were being made by people like Michel de Bataille to find an alternative institute that can do work, the same kind of work that this Caribbean Institute of Catechetics were doing, but more in terms of liturgy. That's where the School of Liturgy began. You see? So people like Michel began the School of Liturgy in Trinidad, and with people like Father Ildefonso Scroots and so, and they started again to do the same kind of indigenization of the liturgy, but the emphasis is more on liturgy, whereas with the catechetics we're talking about theology in general.
Right.
So it was with the efforts at the School of Liturgy began in Trinidad, and then we began to have them in the different islands. So the School of Liturgy movement became the vehicle for what you might call the precursor of what we have about theology today, is the School of Liturgy. You see?
Okay.
Oh yes, in those days, and that's where people like the memory of people like Bernsey, Bernsey, Felix, June and Everett, and so, they're all involved with Michel and so in that School of Liturgy movement, which continues up to today.
Yes.
Continues up to today. Well, it started at that time, but within that context of the Black power and Caribbean consciousness, that's when the whole thing began. School of Liturgy. Now, what happens was this: that in the 80s, I went to study in Chicago, and Joe Harris was also doing his doctoral studies in Chicago. And we were at CTU. Everett at one point had a friendship in Chicago also too, and June came up. And in Chicago, we ran into people like Bob Schreiter. Bob Schreiter was a big contextual theology guy, And so we are studying. I studied, for example, on the Bob Schreiter, Carol Stimula, and Tony Gibbons, and cultural anthropologists and so. And we brought to them this kind of discourse that would happen in the region, in terms of Michel's attempt at indigenization of theology. And as I remember that with Michel, the School of Liturgy, okay? But now we were in the context of Theological Institute. We were at Catholic Theological Union. Joe was at McCormack, and so, so we were at the level of theological reflection. And it's there that we took up the challenge of how could we begin to take theology seriously in the Caribbean context and do what we might call contextual theology. So Bob Schreiter, who was the global figure in terms of contextual theology at the time, he he was the one who kind of really gave us the theological, the framework, theological framework, the methodological framework for the whole concept of what we might call Caribbean theology. And so when we graduated, Joe, we came back to the Caribbean. Joe was just in the seminary. Michelle was at the time running the Pastoral Center in Trinidad. And of course, I was running the Pastoral Center in St. Lucia.
Okay.
So we decided that, look, let us take that discussion from the level of liturgy alone to theology. Let us really make it a theological discourse. So what was happening at the level of liturgy and theology, let's bring to the level of theological discourse. And so it was that with Joe at the seminary, Michelle at the Pastoral Center in Trinidad, myself at the Pastoral Center in St. Lucia, we decided that let us form a kind of a conference in which we will be looking at theological issues from the perspective of Caribbean theology, Caribbean history, Caribbean culture, and so forth. Now, because of the suspicion that we had experienced over the Caribbean Institute of Catechetics.
Catechetics, right, yeah.
We did not want to place that institute at the seminary where Joe was the rector.
Right.
So we decided that what we're going to do is that we're going to place it at the Pastoral Centers. So we decided that the conference will begin under the sponsorship of the Pastoral Centers with Pastoral Center in Trinidad, Pastoral Center in St. Lucia, and also the Pastoral Center in Dominica.
Well, what are these pastoral centers? I mean, I'm always hearing about it, but
those pastoral centers were really kind of what you might call practical formation workshops. It was basically centers where all kind of formation was being done in terms of not only liturgy, but all sort of teachings on Bible, for example, introduction to theology, and so spirituality. And so the pastoral centers were the centers of formation, lay formation. It was lay formation. So you see, prior to that, there was really, in those islands, there was no structured institutes for lay formation. So those pastoral centers, and it's a phenomenon that came actually from some parts of Latin America, and attempts were made in Europe and in the United States. The whole model of what's called a pastoral center, in which laypersons would be trained in pastoral formation, pastoral leadership, so they can take over pastoral work, they can run parishes and things like that, but they required the necessary theological formation. You couldn't just take people.
I'm intrigued by this actually, yes, yeah.
Precisely. So these pastoral centers became models of formation and theological development. And so they were established, many parts of Latin America they were, and in the Caribbean, the models came. Trinidad had the one, St. Lucia had one, Dominica had one, Jamaica also had one. Yeah. Basically, as I said, it was lay formation in pastoral leadership, so that they can take leadership over the parishes and so forth, be trained as catechists and so forth, but with the emphasis on giving them solid biblical grounding in spirituality, and grounding in theology, some kind of grounding in theology. So by the time a person, we used to give certificates, for example, certificate of participation. So that somebody used to do, so we did, theology, introduction to theology 101, kind of thing like that,
Yeah.
So people had an idea about what theology was all about, what introduction to spirituality was all about, and so forth. So that's what we're doing. So with those institutes as kind of centers, we felt that they were safe from being the
hierarchy.
The hierarchy.
I think it's quote there.
So
you can say the word now.
Because of what had happened with the Caribbean Catechetics Institute in Trinidad, we decided let's do it in St. Lucia. Let's start in St. Lucia. And this is how the first one was held in St. Lucia. But the whole idea was that we wanted it to be regional. We wanted it to be regional And so it should really be kind of a rotating kind of phenomenon.
So who was part of this first session, this first thing in St. Lucia?
The first conference in St. Lucia, wow, there were people like from Trinidad. There were a lot of people, like they were Henry Charles was there, Sister Diane was there, Martin Seju was there, June was there. Everyone was on St. Lucia. You're not there. Jerry Boudou came down. Jerry Boudou was part of that, and we had people like Bob Schreitz, I told you, who was we had met in the United States as our professor. He came down to help us to start the whole thing. In fact, that's why Bob was at our very first theology conference. Michelle was there. People like Steve Solomon were there. Urban Hudlin. I mean, they were in the publication we did on the CTC 25 years. You can see a list of all the participants from Trinidad. There's a whole contingent from Trinidad. Of course, there were the contingents from Dominica, because the Dominican Institute was there, and from St. Lucia also. We had people like Esteban Cross was there from Suriname.
Yes.
He is one from the first one there. We had a number of Jamaicans there also too, who had that meeting. So this first conference held in St. Lucia, we basically looked at kind of like Idris Hamid's Contextual Theology, Idris Hamid's seminal paper on Caribbean theology. We looked at that as a kind of a basis for reflections. So we did not have any theme as such in our first conference, but from the first conference, we decided we're going to have a second conference, and the second conference, we thought we should look at the concept of spirit in the Caribbean.
Okay, and that's when the theme started to develop.
That's when the theme began to develop. So at the first conference, we decided to start to have a theme, and we had the second conference. We looked at I think there's rituals. The second one was rituals we looked at in the Caribbean. But it was second one was supposed to be in Dominica. And we had all plans made to go to Dominica for it. And when there was a Caribbean airline, an airline called Caribbean Airlines, it was one of those little regional airlines. We had all booked to travel to Dominica on it, and the airline went bankrupt.
Oh my God. So you got your money.
The airline went bankrupt, and we said, look, we cannot let that happen to us. So we did have our second conference. we had it, but what we did, we went to Trinidad. We went to Trinidad for it, And
but before you go on, PABA, I want to find out a little bit more about this first conference, and because how you all decided what you all would do each day. I mean, what?
Well, I think we had a call for papers before. We just asked persons who were already doing work in theology. We'd asked them to come and share what they were doing. And in fact, this is how one of the models that CTC developed into started from there. We said, okay, we want people who will do formal papers, present formally a paper on theology, but also persons who are doing things, doing research, come and share the research. So, for example, there was Esteban was doing research on funeral rituals in Suriname, for example. So he came and he shared on that. Michel Francis was doing funeral rituals in St. Lucia, and he shared on that.
Okay.
So we had people who were doing like Andrew in Grenada was doing the morning ground. He was interested in the morning ground experience, fasting and so forth. So he was doing research. So the conference began as an invitation to Caribbean thinkers, theologians and thinkers who were interested in spirituality and theology, but also Caribbean history, to come and share whatever research they were doing. And this is how our first conference came. And we did I edited the first collection from the conference, in which presented the main papers, and you can look at it and you can see the kind of ththings we talked about it. It was there that Michel, for example, first gave a talk on this concept of Lectio Divina, for example, and the notion of lectured even as a way of doing theology. You know, in those early days, he began to develop those concepts, which of course, and Michel had really been a strong proponent of that we should not make the conference an academic exercise. He said, not like the theology conferences of North America and so forth. He said, no, let our Caribbean model be a model that is indigenous to us, that involves the people, the ordinary people, because the ordinary people are in fact doing theology, you know, and this is where we develop people like Gloria Bertram, you know, sort of pots and pans theology kind of thing. That Michel said it. Every Caribbean woman, every Caribbean man reflect on his or her faith as they go through their daily struggles.
Exactly.
You know, and it comes out in their proverbs, in their songs, in their sayings. And this is theology. We have to understand that as theology, you know, fides quaerens intellectum, faith seeking understanding. So when a woman is going through her struggles and she's crying on God, the God in whom she knows, to help her, he says, that is the Caribbean theological experience. That is faith. And we have to get the understanding to bear on that faith, you know. So that's why Michel was always very, very, very concerned that the conference should have lay people, ordinary people, catechists, not just priests or theologians or religious, but people who are involved in virtually being church and doing church. You know? And he said, look, let's do it, but let's do it reflectively. Let's not just do things, but let's reflect on what we're doing. And if we are living out our faith, we reflect on how you're living our faith. That's theology. It's reflection upon how your faith lives. Yeah.
So it seems that a lot of people, the lay people are talking about now, would have come through their association with the Pastoral Center.
Pastoral Center.
Right. Okay. All right.
And so that's why we always said the conference will always be for lay workers, catechists, persons who are involved in faith formation, persons who are involved in parish development. That's what the conference is. It is really sharing our experiences as Caribbean people, trying to be faithful to the gospel in our particular Caribbean context. You know?
But tell me something. I mean, all of this, as when I sit and hear these stories, I get so excited. I get excited, part of me, and then the next part of me look around at what's going on today, and you're kind of asking yourself, what happened is that there seems to be less consciousness, less social consciousness, because you started off by talking about that there was a real consciousness that was kind of going through the air. There seems to be less consciousness. There also seems to be maybe less oneness for starters. I mean, we don't have the seminary functioning in a way that it once did. And then the whole understanding of lay people involved in this kind of theology. You don't have the pastoral centers anymore.
Yeah.
Church is not really a thing around which people base a lot of their life. It doesn't seem to be relevant. These things occur to you, PABA?
Well, the thing is that we still have the Pastoral Center in St. Lucia and the ones in Dominica. They have been adapted. They've been adapted to contemporary situation. In fact, the Pastoral Center, which I run in St. Lucia now, David Popo is the one who's now director. And I mean, he's attempting to bring the whole concept of the green agenda, you know, ecology and sort of the youth economy and so forth. So so in St. Lucia, at least, we are still trying to continue this engagement with reality or present reality. In Dominica, I know that Monsignor Bill John Lewis is the one who's in charge of the Pastoral Center there, and he's very strong on communication. So he's doing a lot of media work from the Pastoral Center. So in a way, the Pastoral Center exists in our context, trying to respond to contemporary needs. You know, I mean, today media is a big thing, so you can understand why Bill is pushing that. And in our case, the ecology and so forth is a big thing. But the whole idea of the lack of involvement of the lay persons within the process of theology, sort of reflection, I think what has happened, Adanna, is this: that after the whole Black Power movement and what happened in the Caribbean and the involvement of the oppressive forces from outside wanted to squash all of that movement, the ideological battles in the Caribbean became very, very vicious. So even at the level of the university, kind of persons were careful of what they say, because persons were put into camps, who is leftist, who is this, who is that, and whatnot. And so the kind of freedom that we felt in those early days of expressing our opinions and not being categorized or pigeonholed. Well, of course, we were being pigeonholed, but we had a kind of audacity, but we didn't burn about it. Now, I think that kind of boldness gradually disappeared within Caribbean intellectual life. I think as a whole, I think within the persons who put their head out, they knew from the time they put their head out, somebody's going to smash them down, call them, label them something, and therefore they kind of, I think within that spirit of well, say not fear, but caution. Let's be a kind of word. A spirit of caution. So like the intellectual boldness that existed in those early 70s, 80s, 90s has been replaced with kind of caution, intellectual caution. So people express their opinion, but they do it sort of in a cautious way. You see? And I think that has that sort of intellectual caution throughout the region. I think it's true throughout the region that intellectually you have that kind of lack of boldness. It has affected the church. I think we're in the church also too, that kind of people.
That's an interesting bit of analysis you just brought there. PABA.
Yes, within the church, people who would be prepared to sort of put their necks out in terms of experimenting, this, experimenting, that. People will tell you, oh man, the period of experimentation is over. Vatican says this, Rome says this, Rome says that. So people say, okay, all right. Rome says this, Rome says that. All right. You know what I mean? So therefore, the freedom that we felt in those early days, in which we could really engage people, raise issues that are taboo, subjects that are taboo. When you did that, of course, you got licks. Poor Martin got so much licks because what we were doing at the theology conference, the issues, people like Clyde and so forth, they got endless licks because why? We were raising issues in those days that many people figured out were taboo, and poor Martin was the one who was reporting in the Catholic news. So his reports became the targets,
Right.
And therefore, so the endless blows on Martin, endless blows on the conference. So we have to find ways in which, how can we do our work with the freedom that we need? At one point, the then Archbishop of Port of Spain told us that, look, you all can do your conference, you all can do your thing, you all can talk it on, but I defend you all in Rome. He told us that. He told us that, So basically told us that we're on our own, we're on our own. So, to be part of this, the theology conference was a risk people were taking, really. There's a risk. And of course, within the church itself, then people began to marginalize the conference. Oh, these are radicals, these are troublemakers, anti-Rome. Then so a lot of this had to do in terms of the attitude towards the conference.
So
not only in Trinidad, throughout the region.
Yeah, that's one part of things, and then another question is also relevance. Is the church even relevant today? So, I think that there was a time when what you were thinking and what you were doing was kind of embedded in the church itself. And so, society and church together were working together. You were thinking through things together. I'm not seeing that kind of relevance again. So even so now that I am part of the secretariat in CTCT, I'm just wondering, where is CTCT now? Years from this genesis, this wonderful experience that you just spoke about. What is our role now?
Yeah. You see, this is a challenge, Adanna, we've always felt that one of the greatest dangers for the church in the Caribbean is to become perceived as irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know, to be perceived as irrelevant. In other words, at one point, people were fighting us, you know, fighting what the church getting involved in that, church in there. So we were engaged, you know, politicians, I mean, the churches challenged, we boycotted the cocktail party of Eric Williams because what happened was that the Americans were boycotting Cuba at the time and were saying that they didn't want the Cubans involved in the Caribbean Conference of Churches. And we say, look, when Cuba is part of the region, our Cuban theologians are part of our theological reflection. And if we're going to give in to US pressure, we decided that we were going to boycott the cocktail party of the governor general at the time. Those were the kind of militancy in those days, because we were considered relevant, we were challenged, and people had to fight us. You know what I mean? And the big danger we always felt was the time will come when we will be so irrelevant, nobody takes us. You will do their own thing. So you can go ahead and do your own thing now, you know, and let the society go develop its own way, you know, go along its own way, which is an unfortunate thing that's happened in many places. And, you know, CTC, we have to really ask ourselves some serious questions in terms of our relevance. Are we asking the right question? Are we challenging the status quo so that we can help the church to be relevant to the needs of Caribbean people today? Because Caribbean people's needs are there. The needs are there. And once you engage with their needs, man, people will respond. But if you're not engaged with their needs, they'll just see you as irrelevant. You know?
Yeah. So I mean, just before, because we're almost out of time, and I think another part of things I kind of wanted to get out today was also some memories, some what you would say stands out to you over the years. You know, was it the relationships, the line, the radicalness? What?
I think that you know, our region has produced some beautiful minds, you know, beautiful spirits, beautiful souls, you know, beautiful people who have really been in love with God, in love with the Word of God, and passionately love Caribbean people. You know, you think of somebody like a Michel de Vertaille, you know somebody like a Henry Charles. It's somebody like a Peter Shakshi of Suriname. You know, you think of a Sister Diane, you know, who have gone. I mean, recently Jennifer Ryan. All of these people have gone. They've gone. But for me, the memory is like, you know, for me, these are our pantheon. They are our saints. You know, so we talk about the communion of saints. These are really our communion. And for me, CTC is part of that communion of Black minds and hearts who are passionately in love with the church, passionately in love with Caribbean people, and who've got this intellectual curiosity to see how we can use our minds and our hearts to really incarnate the church within the Caribbean context. Because for us, nobody can do it for us. We are the only ones who can make the church relevant in our Caribbean context. We're the ones who can do it. Caribbean people are the ones who can do it for Caribbean people. And this is a contribution that we have to make to the Church Universal. And the Church Universal will be poorer if this Caribbean experience is not enhanced, is not developed. So you know, today we can talk about the contribution that people like Cyril and Methodius have made to development of the Slavic languages. I mean, these are priest missionaries, right? Who got to love people, love their culture, and develop a writing system for the culture. And look at today, we have nations. I mean, these are churchmen who did that, you know? So the kind of contribution that churchmen and women have made in church history, our Caribbean churchmen and women have made and can make and can continue to make. So for me, that is really what CTC is all about, you know?
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because memory you know, we have a thing of lost memory here. In the Caribbean. So I think if we could serve a space of, I mean, immortalize mightn't be the right word, but some space that could cause a remembering to happen, you know, where we have come from and what we owe to what has gone before us, and the kind of blood, sweat, and tears that has gone into, just creating a space of freedom.
Indeed. I mean, Derek Walcott is the one who says that the greatest pain and the greatest hurt of Caribbean is amnesia. When we don't remember, when we forget, I mean, when the film The Shoah was Spielberg, when Spielberg did The Shoah, and they asked him, I mean, there have been so many films on the Holocaust, and you're going to do another 4-hour film on the Holocaust? And Spielberg said, lest we forget. He says, there are many Jewish young men and women today, when you tell them about the Shoah, the Holocaust, they say, what is that? He said, lest we forget. That's why I'm doing it. So what you're talking about, memory, lest we forget.
I think that's a good way to kind of close and to take us through into lest we forget. So if there's anything that I would say that I would love to be a part of contributing to as we continue to try to keep this going, I think it would be with those as the watchwords. Lest we forget, what has gone into bringing this to be, the love for the laity, the coming together as one, the pastoral context, the searching, the fighting, the courage, the passion, the love, and of course the memories of persons who were dear to us in whatever way it is, So I'm glad I was able to have this conversation with you.
The consistency to you, the stick at itness, the stick at itness. I mean, you take somebody like a Bunzi, I mean, for years and years, just doing that, the secretariat work, doing it, just selflessly, a guy like Felix, Felix Edmond, just constantly. I've been documenting for some 10 memorial, the consistency that, so, it's really a really wonderful experience to be part of. And for me, the gratitude, for me, Adanna, I'm grateful that I've been from the beginning. I'm part of that experience. And for me, that is grace. That is grace. That's grace. It's really grace.
Lest we forget. Oh gosh. So thanks so much for chatting with us today. And just a reminder to those who, would have been joining us. We were talking about the CTCT, the Conference on Theology in the Caribbean today. So the CTCT will be having its conference coming up in Grenada, the lovely Spice Isle of Grenada, from June 26th to the 30th. And we continue to try to grapple with kind of reshaping our society, our societies, with all that has happened, particularly over the past 2 years, and what does that mean going forward? I think that more or less this is where we find ourselves right now. But these wonderful memories shared are also a challenge to us to kind of, and it's a kind of litmus test for us. Are we on the right path? What are we using as our checks and markers to see that, we doing what God intends for us at this point in time. So again, lest we forget. So thank you, my dear.
Great.
And thank you for all the passion that you have given to us over the years.
My pleasure.
And the tremendous witness and presence and power. Thank you so much, PABA.
At the end of the Seder meal, we always say, next year in Jerusalem, well, see you in Grenada.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay.
Next month's in Grenada, for sure.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Okay, much love. Bye-bye.
Love, darling. Bye-bye.